I just wanted to start out by saying, first of all, as we are on the air, thank you so much, Devin Scillian, for joining me. It's such a pleasure. You've had such an illustrious career, and it's such a great thing to have you aboard and for me to be able to ask you questions about so many of your dimensions of your talent. This is pretty cool.
Well, you and I have had a mutual admiration society going for some time, Dan. So it's
we have. Yeah. I wanted to start out by actually saying, so that everybody knows, of course they should know, well, maybe they don't know totally, but that you began your career in Detroit in 95. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, you had, as for news information, as an anchor or a reporter, you had been to places like Illinois and Texas, and you started out in Kansas. You're originally from Kansas?
Kind of, yeah. You know, I grew up in a military family, and it's always a really tricky thing to ask an Army brat where they're from, because you know, by the time I was 18, we'd lived about a dozen places, made about a dozen moves. But I was born in Kansas, ended up back in Kansas for high school, went to the University of Kansas, married a Kansas girl, and so yeah, I at the heart of it, I guess I'd have to say I'm a Kansan. Yeah,
that's great. That's great. And then in 95, you came to Detroit, and you had replaced Mort Crim, as I understand it, and who had been here, who had been here many years prior to you.
Yeah.
And by the way, did you know that Mort played the piano?
Absolutely. Mort started as a musician. I believe he had a nickname back before he got into television that was something like Arkansas Slim or something like that. I want to say, but yes, Mort was really good on the piano, and of course, obviously can write. So yeah, we loved talking music back in the day, and still.
How cool is that? And you know, it's also ironic that so many guys who have been in your kind of a business have maybe some kind of a musical background, even like Lester Holt. Is a jazz bass player. I mean, right. So I guess this goes on and on. But what brought you over to Detroit, I guess is the question.
Well, you know, we had been in Oklahoma City for 6 years before coming, and we just decided wanted to go try and I wanted to see if I could tackle big market TV, and signed a contract to come to Detroit. And then a month later, the Oklahoma City bombing happened.
Oh,
so
wow.
I was already earmarked for coming to Detroit, and then this life-changing event kind of happened right in my own backyard. And in a way, I mean that literally. I mean, our house, we lived about 12 miles from downtown Oklahoma City, but our house shook that morning.
No kidding.
Blast went off. So it was the worst day of my life in a lot of ways, but it was in other ways. It again. It connected me to Oklahoma and the people there forever. I still, this many years, 26 years later, I still get messages and emails from people who I don't even know, but they were just thinking of, especially, you know, we just passed the anniversary of it.
Oh, sure.
And Oklahoma City, to be honest with you, Dan, got really difficult. It got very tough for me to leave. I felt a little bit of guilt because I ended up, I was supposed to start at the beginning of August. And so I left about 3 months after the bombing happened. And it was tough. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing then by leaving it all. But actually, to be honest with you, Corey and I don't think we thought we would be in Detroit all that long. Because I had been flirting with, you know, talking with the networks and other big jobs, and we just kind of thought we would probably be here for 3 to 5 years and then go somewhere else. And John Lennon once said that life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And
how true is that?
By the time you know, things came around, you know, we had 2 more kids. Well, we had twins after we got here, and so a family of 6. And we always struggled to figure out how to move all of us, you know, and raise a family the way we wanted to in New York. And Detroit just kind of kept seeming to be the place that we should be. And
so you have 6 children.
No, a family of 6.
A whole family of 6.
Kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, still.
Yeah, it's a big family nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a large family. And I have to say that, with all the things that you do besides anchoring the news, it's quite amazing that you're able to dip into these other art categories of music and authorship. It's fascinating to me. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you aboard, because this guy just doesn't report the news. He's doing everything. So,
well, one thing though that I know, and it took me a while to figure this out too, Dan. It does look like maybe I'm all over the place between journalism and writing children's books and playing and writing music, but they all have one thing in common, which is storytelling. And I love a good story. Journalism is really built on good storytelling, and so is being an author. And I think somebody, that's what country. I sort of come from a country vein when it comes to music, and country music is so often storytelling.
Well, yeah. Coincidentally, I was going to ask you, and you're moving ahead of me a little bit, but that's fine. I wanted to ask you why country, but of course that was obvious because there's so much story in country. And it's pretty cool. But before we get to that, I do need to ask you about a few things relative to your anchoring the news. And now I'm just going to dwell on this just momentarily. We don't have to dwell on it. But the questions would be, we know about yellow journalism. But from my point of view, in terms of, or I guess anybody's who watches the news, that when it comes to local news, it's far less yellow or caustic or divisional than would be in cable news, except for maybe one of your predecessors, Bill Bonds, back in the day. And of course, there have been textbooks written about those scenarios, as you probably know. But why is it less in local news than it would be, do you think, in national news? That there would be this dichotomy?
There's a couple of different things at work. For one thing, our marching orders are just kind of different. We don't do a ton of news analysis. And analysis is maybe another word for filling time. And on a cable news network, you're filling a 24-hour day, and it is obviously a lot cheaper to sit 4 people down in a studio and ask them all what they think about immigration policy than it is to fly a television crew somewhere where immigration issues are happening and talking to the many different, and this very complex issue. It's cheaper, and you can fill a lot more time just sitting down in the studio and talking. And that is an unfortunate thing, because I really, I think about this a lot, Dan. I have longed for CNN to be more of the American BBC. We need, and to some degrees, the CBC. And I love that we're this close to Canada, because I'm a big fan of the CBC. They have a nightly newscast in prime time. How's that never happened?
And you're also heard in Ontario, by the way, correct?
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah. We have tons of, in fact, it's funny, we're also the NBC, for reasons that have still never been fully adequately explained to me, we are the NBC affiliate on a lot of cable systems all over Canada. So I occasionally get emails from Alberta. When I first got here, there was a woman on Vancouver Island who used to write me all the time, and I was like,
really?
Why is she watching Detroit news? I don't know, but the other, we don't. Even though I have a Sunday morning program that, of course, often involves people's opinions about local and state political matters. But Dan, the only thing, I do get my share of hate mail, and the one thing that I've always thought,
really, but it's so well. Okay.
There are people that can find something political in just about anything I say these days. We're so hyper politicized and sensitive to those things. But what I will say is that about half of the critical emails that I receive, cannot believe that I am such a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. And the other half can't understand why Channel 4 puts a liberal like me on the air every week. So I can only assume that that's a good sign, because
that is a good sign.
I went to journalism school at the University of Kansas and really am old enough, I guess now, to still believe in the idea of a neutral journalist. There's some people who've decided that that's just not possible. We can't possibly be expected to keep our opinions to ourselves, which I think is hilarious. But I've worked my whole life to be what I guess I would call an aggressive Switzerland. Yeah. And I still think journalism can do that and aspire to that.
I applaud you for that. I wish that we could go back to some of those days, not just with local, but primarily with the cable and the national stuff. It's so beleaguering, but that's a whole nother deal. The other question I wanted to ask you relative to what you do is, I know, I've checked, that 80 to 90% of the news that's broadcast, at least locally, maybe nationally, I suppose, is on the negative side in terms of, well, bad things that happen to people. And I often wonder, when you go home to your family, do you carry any of that with you, or do you insulate yourself in some ways?
Most journalists find ways to compartmentalize a little bit. Sometimes it's absolutely impossible, and it depends on where your sensitive spots are. When you first become a parent, because we talk about this in the newsroom a lot with people who become a parent for the first time. All of a sudden, it feels like every story is about something that's dangerous or horrible about a child somewhere, and you become very hypersensitive to that. Oklahoma City was one of those where it was kind of, there was no real way for me to act like that wasn't. It's fun. In fact, it's funny. The mental health agencies fanned out and sent people to all the TV stations in Oklahoma City saying, you're a bunch of journalists and you believe, of course, that you can just sort of deal with this without it affecting you. And we're telling you that that's not true. You need to be ready for this to hit you in a different kind of way. And we all kind of were like, yeah. Well, they were right. It hit most of us like a ton of bricks at some point, somewhere along the line. So, I go back and forth on this though, Dan, because on the one hand, yes, I don't want to take and beleaguer my family when I get home. My wife Corey, I don't want to take my work home with me all the time. I don't want it to feel this oppressive weight on my shoulders. And yet I also don't ever want to be cavalier about someone losing their life. To anything, to crime, to a severe storm, to a horrible accident that happens because somebody somewhere was negligent. I don't want to get too, I hope that we never get to the point where those kind of things aren't important. And so, people say to me all the time, why isn't there more good news on television? Well, I'm surrounded by good news. Most of us are. We've got many of us are, we're healthy, we're happy, we're not going to bed hungry at night, on and on and on. Occasionally I like to remind, obviously we want to balance it out and find stories that make us smile, and the ones that kind of reinvigorate our faith in humankind. Right. But for the most part, as a journalist, I think our job is to tell you what's going on in the world. It's the most underappreciated and overlooked thing that we do, is just being the town crier and saying, here's what's happening in the world around you every day. I think that's, everybody goes to school for their own, or goes into journalism for their own reasons. Some people want to be, Edward R. Murrow and exposing, big stories of corruption. Some people want to be that, the ones that hold government's feet to the fire. I basically wanted to be Homer. And I don't mean Homer Simpson. I mean Homer, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Right. I wanted to bring the narrative of here's the world around us, and try to be appreciated as an art form. Right.
And you brought up a name, Edward R. Murrow, and I know that you had received 4 Edward R. Murrow awards during your lifetime as this anchor. And I have to admit to you that I used to watch the Edward R. Murrow show. That's how old I am, but that's quite a thing. I mean, my goodness, I did that come consecutively year after year? Or
There's a couple, I think there was one year that I won it 2 years in a row, but it's been sporadic. They've been over the years, they've been for different things. 2 were for writing, 2 were for writing, 2 were for best documentary, which really is writing when you get down to it, I guess. So in a way, they've all been about storytelling and writing, and so to me, that's been a those I'm as proud of those as I can possibly be.
Of course, but moving on from journalism into my favorite areas, which, well, I have to do more with the art side of Devin Scillian, is the fact that you've been an author and a musician. And I'm trying to figure out still, as I mentioned earlier, how you would be able to parlay all this time. I don't know how you do this. It's hard for me to walk and chew gum, as they say, at the same time, but you do this. And so, but with your authoring, it's been 20 children's books. Am I getting that right?
The 21st in July will be coming out. Yeah.
And why children's books?
When I was in high school, I had a very brilliant English teacher who assigned us a class assignment was to write a children's story. It was my favorite school assignment that I ever had. And I just absolutely loved writing the story that I wrote. I still have it at home. And I was just really, it really lit me up. I just thought it was great, great fun. And then when I got to college, I studied children's literature, studied fiction writing, and I had a very encouraging professor there named Alan Lichter, who thought that one of my stories just held an awful lot of promise. He said, he took my story, he passed it out to the whole class, and he said, Devin, you could get this published tomorrow. Now, Alan was wrong. Alan was wrong. I could not get it published tomorrow because I tried.
Well, how did you try? Did you send things out to
get it? Yeah, but one of the things, and then the book that the manuscript that I first wrote, and I wrote it the year that our first child was born, when Griffin was born. I felt so good about it and thought, this is the one. And so I started sending it out all over the place. I could paper the walls of the newsroom here with the rejection letters that I received. Oh, yeah. A lot of it was because
I got those too.
Yeah, of course, right? I mean, you're nobody until you've been told that you're nobody. Yeah. And I didn't really fully understand how to go about getting published. And that's one of the things that I've learned is there's 2 parts of this business. There's the writing, and then there's the figuring out where it should go. And I was a little slow on that. It took me 10 years, Dan, to get the first one published. But
was that self-publishing then?
No. It was, I finally saw a book that made me feel like I saw a book that another company had published. It happened to be Sleeping Bear Press, and I read I thought, this feels like my story, which is what I always tell now aspiring authors. Go spend a lot of time in a bookstore, spend a lot of time in libraries, and find stories that are similar to what you've written, and then go after those publishers because they are already interested in what you're doing.
I never thought about it that way.
I was sending I was sending it out willy-nilly. Oh, let's try Simon & Schuster. Let's try Doubleday, without really understanding the market. And but I had always I just wanted to get one book published, Dan. I just wanted to get.
Yeah, but that's such a great suggestion. I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people that are budding authors that I don't ever hear them saying what you just said.
Yeah, I nobody gave me that advice. I didn't see it anywhere, and I don't know that it would have cut all 10 years off of my search, but it certainly would have cut a few off. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. For instance, my first book called Fibblestax is a rhyming story. I was sending it to publishers who've never published a rhyming story. Did I think they were just going to bend to my brilliance? I don't know what I was thinking, but I was wasting my time because there are, and I've had to learn that there are publishing houses that don't want any stories about animals. There are some that don't want any, on and on and on. There are some that are very into, some have very narrow demands about how long the manuscript can be. On and on and on. You really need to kind of get a grasp of the marketplace.
Tell me about this story that you wrote called A for America, which found itself under the White House Christmas tree. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So the after I got Fibblestax published, and I really hadn't thought about anything beyond getting one published. It was just a big box that I wanted to put a check mark in, and I did. And after it came out, the editor of the book, Heather Hughes, called me and said, "Well, what is your next book going to be?" And I said, Well, I don't know. I haven't, I had a few other manuscripts laying around, but I hadn't really thought about it very seriously. I was still, don't mess up my vibe here. I'm still in the afterglow of just getting this one done. And she said, well, I'd like you to think about it. She didn't say write it. She just said, I'd like you to think about a book called A is for America. Well, as I've already mentioned, I grew up in a military family. My dad put on the uniform of the United States every day. My dad did 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, lived all over the world and all over the country. When we would live on Army bases, every morning, reveille would sound across the base, and they would raise the flag, and every night taps would, a retreat would bring the flag down, and then taps later on in the night. So it was impossible to grow up the way I did without thinking a lot about my country. Right. And so I couldn't, when she said, think about a book called A is for America, I couldn't think about anything else. I just, sat down and just started writing. And I honestly, she called me on a Monday, and by late Wednesday afternoon, so 3 days later, I called Heather and I said, well, I think I've got it. And she said, she kind of laughed. She's like, you think you wrote a book in 3 days? And I thought, uh-oh, I may have overplayed my hand here. She said, well, fix it to me, send it to me, and we'll use it as an outline, and we'll figure out, from there. I sent it to her, and Thursday morning, so just a couple of hours later, she called me and she said, it's done. We're not going to touch a thing.
Wow.
And so that's my story, Dan, is writing a book can take 10 years or 3 days. Okay. I recommend the 3-day method if you can. So the dumb luck that we had, and this is, you've experienced this, I'm sure, many times. Sometimes you just kind of luck your way into weird timing.
Oh, yeah.
So we published A is for America, and 3 months later, 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
All of a sudden, every school, everybody was devouring, things about the U.S., things that had a patriotic theme. And, this was an alphabet book that kind of, celebrated all the things. Oh, sorry about that overhead sound.
That's okay.
This was an alphabet book that sort of celebrated all the different things that it means when we say America or to be American. Right. And all of a sudden, the thing just went gangbusters, and it's the only national bestseller that I've written, that's for sure. It sold over 250,000 copies.
Oh my! Wow!
And one morning, while everybody's getting ready for school, we had the Today Show on in the background, and one of my daughters yells, "Oh my gosh, Dad's book is under the White House Christmas." They were doing a tour of the White House.
Wow!
Christmas. And nobody had told me it was going to be under there. But then the next spring, I got invited to come read at the Easter egg roll, the White House Easter egg roll.
Right.
And they told me on the phone, they said, don't worry, you don't have to worry about bringing your book. We'll have a book here for you to read. And I get to the White House that day, and I assume it's going to be A is for America. And it was not. It was my first book, Fibblestax.
Oh, my gosh.
And the woman who hands it to me says, this is Mrs. Bush's private copy. Please,
oh my gosh,
back to her when you're done reading it. And I was just kind of overwhelmed that, Fibblestax is a book about where words come from. And so it's not surprising to me that a former librarian like Laura Bush might enjoy it, but I had no idea that it had ever crossed her desk.
What an honor. I mean, that
was pretty thrilling.
Be like crazy.
Yeah. And then here we are now, 20 books later, and the 21st one, which is called A Parliament of Owls, which will be out in July.
And it's always, I have to say, I've been looking over some of the titles. I mean, Memoirs of a Tortoise, right? I mean, I have to pick that up. I can do that with my grandkids, because I've got 5 grandkids, but I need to start reading some of these things to them. So
well, it's funny. I've done 5 memoirs books, and most of them all were sort of humorous books. Memoirs of a Goldfish was the first one, then Memoirs of a Hamster, Memoirs of a Parrot, Memoirs of an Elf, which is a Christmas book. They all aim to be kind of funny. Right. Memoirs of a Tortoise, I wasn't sure should be a memoirs book. I knew I wanted to write a book about the theme of it. We know that people lose their pets sometimes. Pets die and people lose their pets. Yeah. Well, my book is about a pet that loses its person, which happens when you're a tortoise, because tortoises live, to be so. And my pet my tortoise in my book is named Oliver, and he and his well, he calls him his pet, but his owner is 80 years old. They're both 80 years old, and Ike passes away, and Oliver says, I thought we were going to grow old together. Which, because of course, Ike had grown old, but Oliver was just 80, which for a tortoise is
you're hitting a fiber with me, because we lost our dog Oliver.
Oh,
so, yeah, I know, but but I do like I don't know what I like.
Yeah, it is the worst thing, isn't it? Going through that.
It's terrible,
and that's part of why I liked the idea of this book. I thought the switch of it was a really interesting thing, and so Oliver can't understand why he had to lose Ike, and so he goes to his 137-year-old mother, who lives 10 gardens away, and it takes Oliver a long time, of course, to crawl his way across 10 gardens, and he gets to his mother, and he says, why do we have to lose people? And she says, well, people don't live as long as we do, and we only get to have them in our lives for a little while, and we have to appreciate every single day that we have with them.
Oh my gosh!
Gone, we have all these wonderful memories.
Where does this come from, though? How do you think that way? I'm stymied. I have to tell you honestly, why it's reversed.
Yeah. It started because a couple of years ago, Dan, I read a newspaper article about a couple. I think they were in Hawaii, and they were getting older, and they had a pet tortoise, and they were trying to figure out how to take care of their tortoise in their estate planning. Now, this isn't like somebody leaving their poodle $1 million.
Right.
This tortoise was going to need a long, a lifetime of care from somebody, and it's a serious, kind of quandary to find somebody who can take on that kind of responsibility, and that,
right.
I don't want to call it a burden, but it was going to be, and they were struggling to find who was, and I was just so fascinated by that conundrum. And like some of the books that I've written, I could not just write it. It took me a long time of thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And finally, I decided to tackle it in a memoir fashion. Most of the memoirs I've written are day by day by day, or night by night by night. For a tortoise, it's month by month, because of course they live a little more slowly. And so it's a year in the life of Oliver. And,
wow, that's phenomenal.
Finally came through, but it is. A lot of people have. In fact, I was just at the Texas Library Association meeting, and I did not expect people to come to me in tears about the book, because it's been nominated for the Bluebonnet Award, which is a big book award in Texas. But a lot of librarians and teachers, just like you, there was a loss somewhere, and of course, loss over these last 2 years because of COVID has been so profound and felt by so many people. Even if you didn't lose somebody, maybe you knew someone who did, or you at least thought about the possibility of losing someone to this horrible thing that took the lives of 1 million Americans alone. Yeah. So another thing with the timing, that just kind of how it worked out.
Yeah. So we could talk a lot more about that, but now I have to go on to my favorite subject, which is music. I've known you to be, yes, a guitar player. I'm thinking acoustic, but I don't know if you do electric as well. But no,
not very much.
Yeah. Okay, but the storytelling thing I get, because with the books and with the stories on the air, I get all that. But how do you gravitate to music? When did you gravitate to music amidst all these other things that you've been doing? When did that start? I can't pinpoint that one. I would have to say that music was my first love. I just can't remember a time when music wasn't important to me. And my mom back in the day was into community theater, and there'd be a lot of musical theater around, and songs of Broadway and the standards playing in my house. My dad's from Western Kentucky, and I suppose that's where some of a lot of the country influence came from. Mm-hmm. But I was just I played piano and cello as a kid, and in fact my piano teacher quit me because she realized I was just playing by ear and not really learning how to read music. Or you're reading the news. What?
And But and then I was before I ever got to journalism, I was a theater student at Kansas and was into musical theater, and what really turned things for me as far as playing, because I was screwing around a lot on the piano as when I was young, but I got to college and there was a guy in the dorm who played banjo. And a banjo player generally needs a guitar player to play along with him to kind of give a rhythm section.
Yeah.
Dan taught me to play the guitar to play along with him. And the first couple of songs that I learned how to play on the guitar were by Gordon Lightfoot, Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and Circle of Steel, and a bunch of his great songs. And I just kept, more and more getting into acoustic guitar and having.
Did he write "If You Could Read My Mind"? No.
Yeah.
Was that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. You Could Read My Mind. A million great songs. And, I just, in fact, the ability of his crisscross of what I like about writing and music, he really is a classic troubadour, just kind of writing about damsels in distress and brave sea captains and that sort of thing. So that was a powerful influence on me, but so was, Merle Haggard and all those great country acts that I loved when I was growing up. And I had a weird kind of, I love the Statler Brothers just as much as I love the Temptations. So I kind of had a weird sort of country and R&B thing.
I think that's great, though, to be able to cross-pollinate those things.
Yeah, I think so too. And they're both about harmony, right? I mean, all those great harmony. That's one of my passions and loves is harmony, and so that speaks to country music, and it speaks to all those great R&B groups that you and I both.
And speaking of that, then you're part of a group called Sons of Arizona. Is that
Arizona Sun?
Arizona Sun. I'm sorry. Yep. And how many members are there in that group?
We're a group of 6, and there's a lot of 4-part harmony songs that we do.
I was just going to say you have a lot of harmony going on in there, which is very cool.
Eagles were a huge influence on me with all their great tight harmonies. But so were the Osborne Brothers and lots of great, bluegrass groups, and even the gospel groups like the Blackwoods and the Imperials, because I would watch those guys on Hee Haw back in the old days. And so harmony really influenced a lot of what I love about music. Yeah.
And how often do you go out with the group to concertizing?
Year to year, things have. You ask any live performer, things have really dried up there for 2 years, of course, on us. But
okay, so prior to COVID.
Yeah, prior to COVID, and now that we're after, we probably play, I don't know, 10 to 12 gigs a year. It's not. We've all got, with the exception of one guy who is a full-time musician in the band, or actually 2. I take it back, 2. But the rest of us, have other jobs that we have to deal with, and so it's just a great. But they're a great band. They're like an old country jukebox. I can turn around and say, 14 Karat Mind, and off we go. They just know. Yeah.
You have how many albums out now that you've done?
I've done technically 4. One of them was a children's album based on A Is for America. Just a ton of songs that all the leftover ideas that I was telling you about. About America. So I did that. But the most recent one is an album that I did in Nashville called Letter from London. And it was produced by a Detroit native named Doug Cahan, who used to be in a group called Flash Cahan.
I know Doug. I've known Doug a long time. Well, he's a great player and a great producer. Yeah,
he's the bomb, and he's done 2 of my albums, and I just love him like a brother. And hopefully, my deal with my wife Corey is that once I pay off one, I can go do another. So still got a ways to go on getting Letter from London paid off, but then I can start.
And your wife, speaking of Corey, she's also in the arts. Isn't she?
Yeah, Corey's a ceramic sculptor.
That's right.
So our house is full of books, music, and ceramics.
Listen, I don't know how you're doing this. I really don't. I'm thinking.
Well, let me ask you. What are your hobbies when you're not playing music?
I don't have any hobbies.
Well, see, I was going to say that usually people, some people want to go fishing, some people play golf. Well, when I'm done at the station, I go home. Everybody is, all of our kids are out of the house now. But back in the day, I would go home. Everybody was in bed. Yeah. So what would I do? I'd pick up the guitar. or I'd sit down to write, because those were my hobbies.
Well, truth be known, I used to love to fish, go fishing. And we lived on a lake, and we've moved from there to we're on a river now. But I don't. My mindset has changed a little bit about fishing. As you get older, you don't want to hurt things so much. So,
Yeah.
and it's a strange thing to say, maybe, especially for people who like to fish. But that's where my head is lately. And frankly, I love music. I enjoy what I do. I love talking to people like you who have this vast array of art within their scope of what they do. And it's so interesting to me. And I know that people will be interested to hear what you have to say. It's just remarkable stuff.
Well, I love talking about it. I love thinking about creativity and where it comes from. And that's why, I've just always admired, what you've done over your lifetime. I mean, it's an unbelievable body of work. And people like me, I don't want to be, I'm not dismissive at all of my own journalism career. I've had a blast, but most people who have a desire to play music would trade everything if they could find a way to actually get music, right? Jeff Daniels is a good friend of mine, and we joke about it all the time. If only we could just, Jeff and his, his Emmy awards and his, Tony nominations on Broadway and everything. He could just play music full time. That's what.
I have to tell you, between several doctors that I see, cardiologists, this guy, that guy, whatever it is, they all play instruments. They want to do that instead of seeing their patients. So I don't know what to say. Yeah. But, hey, you know what? This has been such a pleasure for me to be able to talk about this stuff with you. And you have such a remarkable career. When you talk about the book stuff and the music, it would be very, very tantalizing to think if it were I, and I'm not you, but that boy, I can do these books and people are reading, and Barbara Bush and this and that and whatever, and I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to go any further than that. But it would seem such a temptation to be able to just immerse yourself fully into those other areas, and you've done so well at what you do, but it's just, there's so much candy in front of you. It's just crazy.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and I can't say I haven't given that thought over the years. But the other thing that, one of the things that brings me joy about both music and books is that I don't have to do them. If they became my, I got a friend who was a sportscaster for a while, and he got out of the sports business, and I remember he called me one night from a Kansas City Royals game. He was in Kansas City, and he called me and he said, "You know what?" This was like the week after he left the television business. He said, "I'm sitting here with a hot dog and a beer. I'm watching a baseball game. I don't have to worry about what time I'm meeting a photographer after it's over. I don't have to worry about the game ending before the news time. I just get to enjoy this game." Right. And there's something to that, right?
There's absolutely
something becomes your job. Sometimes you can lose the joy attached to it. And I wouldn't want that to happen with music or books, but I understand.
Devin Scillian, such a pleasure, such an honor to be able to talk to you. And it's so cool. And I wish you continued success in everything that you're doing.
I so appreciate it, Dan, and we need to get together and jam one of these days.
I hope we do.
Yep, you got
Looking forward to it. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks.